Hello, hello, hello. It is Monday and it is time for Pop in Politics. We are talking about the latest and hot topics, news, and entertainment. I'm KJ, and tonight, well, let me introduce you to my co host and our special guest. All right, of course, we have Crystal Jenkins.
Hey, guys.
Shelly E.
Hi,
and
everybody.
Tonight, joining us for the hour is Chad O. Jackson.
Woohoo!
Hey, ladies, thank y'all for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. So join the conversation by leaving a comment on YouTube or Twitter. We will check the comments periodically throughout the show. And don't just comment, subscribe. If you miss us on YouTube, you can watch us on Rumble or listen to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify under the name Pop and Politics. We are an independent media, so we do encourage and we adore our super chatters. Your donations go a long way in helping us produce conservative content. Also, don't just comment, subscribe. As I mentioned earlier, subscribe and comment throughout the broadcast. We are an independent media, and if you want to support what we do, as I mentioned, the super chatters are much appreciated. All right. This is not just a podcast. This is a movement of God-fearing, truth-seeking, America-loving people that understand we are living in urgent times and there's a target on our backs because we choose freedom. But we must continue to stand. Let's stand together. So subscribe, and together we can amplify this rallying call for freedom. All right, everybody, let's set it off.
Let's go.
So as I mentioned, guys, tonight we have Chad O. Jackson with us. He is a Dallas-based entrepreneur and researcher who starred in the hit 2020 film Uncle Tom and the subsequent 2022 film Uncle Tom 2. Definitely check it out if you have not. It is a wonderful movie. I saw the first one. I have not seen the second one yet.
I've seen them both 2 times, right? Each one.
Yes. So certainly check that out. Also, Chad has a YouTube channel on here. Do we have the YouTube linked there as well? Okay, that is, what is your YouTube, please, Chad? Oh, there it is.
Yeah, just at Chad O. Jackson.
Perfect. All right. So I have here that you talk about Christian values, family values, ethics. And tonight we want to have you on here to talk about DEI, conservatism, and then also the legacy of MLK. That's actually where I initially found you talking about MLK and Marxism. So I want to start off with you, Shelly. Just start off. What would you like to talk about here?
Wow, so much. I thank you again for Chad for coming. I've seen many of your, your interviews on YouTube with your other colleagues and co-hosts. So I think I have an idea of where you might, some of your thinking. I'll say that. I don't want to speak for you. So I'm going to start off by asking this. Where has conservatism gone wrong? And then maybe you can kind of fill in your backstory to coming to that conclusion, if you do come to that conclusion.
That's actually a very loaded question. Where has conservatism gone wrong? The fact is, there's so many places I can start when answering that question, but I will say that most people have no idea what conservatism is. And I think if you ask the average person if they are a conservative and what that means, you'll get different answers. And so conservatism is an ideology that doesn't really have a whole lot of meaning depending on who you ask. The brand of conservatism that I think that I would subscribe to is a kind of John Locke conservatism. One that understands the necessity of a republic and how the onus is on us as the people to maintain our republic. And that takes work, and that takes paying attention, and that takes not being so susceptible to demagoguery and to political propaganda. The fact is, when you think of a monarchy where a king is in charge, a king and his nobles, it's very easy for that king to do whatever the heck he wants to do, because he's not responsible to anyone, because everyone who's not a part of his cabinet are just considered peasants or subjects. So he doesn't have to convince anybody that what he is doing or the trajectory in which he's taking his kingdom is the right way. He's just, doing whatever it is he wants to do. In a republic, it's different, though. I mean, in a republic, the public has a say. We have a say in the trajectory in which our country goes. And so in a republic, the cabinet, the nobles, don't just magically go away. They're still there. They have to do their work, and they have to move the country in the trajectory they wish it to go in a more calculated way, in a more measured way. And the way that they do that is through movements, ideological subversion, through activism, through social justice. And it's through these mechanisms that they're able to convince everybody that, the direction that they want to go is the right way. And so these words, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, these words don't really mean anything in a modern context, because most of your conservatives today or Republicans today, they are conservative or Republican for another reason. They don't like the left, or they don't like Democrats. So they don't really know or have any substance in terms of what the core of their belief is. They just are operating from this notion of, I don't like the quote unquote other side. And so I don't know, that I think is a very whimsical way of answering your question. But the reality is, when it comes to whether one is a conservative or not, the question I always ask is, what is it that you wish to conserve?
Mm-hmm.
Some folks want to conserve traditional values. I think that's most people who call themselves conservative. Some folks want to conserve relics of the Constitution, or the edicts of the Constitution. Some folks want to conserve a kind of, capitalist way of looking at the economy. And so you get a different flavor of what a conservative is, depending on who it is you're talking to or asking. I don't know. Like, for me, when it comes to conservative, I've long called myself a conservative, but recently I'm beginning to rethink what does it mean to be a conservative. And I think because there has been so much tarnishing of the Constitution since 1776, because there has been so much of a bastardization of the Constitution, because we have gone so far that we are a runaway train at this point, and the status quo has undergone many different iterations, many different changes. The fact is, many people who call themselves conservatives today are hearkening back to the 80s or the 70s or the 60s, because they wish to conserve some kind of nostalgic view of what America was like in those eras. And so it's more of a desire to conserve the way they wish, or the way they saw America in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s. But I would argue, as a historian, that even during those times, America was far gone, because you already had the Frankfurt School, you already had the ideological subversion and demoralization. You already had the integration of the schools, which simultaneously, while they were integrating the schools, they were also taking God out of the schools, taking the Bible out of the schools. So what they did was actually quite crafty. I could go on and on and on, but like I said at the beginning of the attempt to answer this question, there's no place to really start, because that's a conversation in itself.
Right. Yeah, no, you are, as you mentioned, a student of history, and you give a lot of good information on your YouTube and also on your Instagram. You also talk a lot about Marxism and how American culture at one time was antithetical to the communist worldview. So my question was, what were key elements of American culture that made it antithetical at one time, and how has that changed?
Well, the reason why the communists had such a tough time penetrating America, whereas they had a very easy time penetrating other countries in the Middle East and Africa and South America, so on and so forth, is because in America, we had several things going for us. We had a deep-seated faith, and we've also tasted freedom. And so with those two things alone, America was very tough to penetrate. And so what the communists resolved to do, after having studied quite extensively the social sciences, the cognitive sciences, human behavior, is to infiltrate culture and to use activism and agitation and other such methods to cause America to implode from the inside, to infiltrate America's institutions. The communists were very present in Black activism here in the United States. They were very present in feminism in the United States, not only during second wave feminism, but also first wave feminism and the suffragettes. And, way back in the early 1900s, this Marxian influence was present. When you look at the so-called labor movement and the muckrakers in the early 1900s, you saw Soviet and Marxian influences therein. And so you can't quite put your finger on a singular moment, but I will say as far as Black America is concerned, when you look at the inception of the NAACP, which was started by the likes of Mary White Ovington and other such white and Jewish socialists and Marxists, this was supposed to be an organization that would so collectivize and organize Black folks to rebel against our constitutional system, to use Black folks as cannon fodder against the American way of life. And this was happening in a time where you saw a lot of strides being made on the part of Black folks, both with and without the help of white folks. And so you saw this kind of assimilating into the American idea that was happening not only on the part of Blacks, but also on the part of Italians and Irish and Asians and other such people who were rejected, not because of racism, but because of tribalism. We as human beings are tribal people. We tend to collectivize with our groups on the basis of shared beliefs, background, and so on and so forth. But what the Marxists have figured out, again, due to their studying of human behavior and the cognitive and social sciences, is that when you can take what we have historically known as tribalism and you call it racism, and you make people believe that this kind of rejection from one group to another is based not upon a idea or a notion that I think that you're different than me, but rather I hate you merely because of the color of your skin, that kind of creates this kind of bitterness and turmoil that's very hard to overcome, which is altogether different than what Booker T. Washington predicted, which was, if we stop focusing on what white folks will or won't do it for us, and we become industrious, we focus on our craft and our education and our uplifting, then it won't matter what white folks will or won't do for us. And what would happen consequently is that those white folks who are prejudiced will learn to get over their prejudiceness for the sake of free trade in the marketplace, which was already happening before the rise of Martin Luther King. So to go back to answer your question, when you look at Black culture and how Black culture in itself is used for Marxian infiltration, the NAACP, who was headed by these kind of Black figureheads, many of these Black figureheads were themselves atheists and agnostics. They didn't believe in God. And as hard as they tried to infiltrate the NAACP, tried to infiltrate Negroes in the South, they had a very hard time doing so. They had some success in Alabama, but they didn't have much success across the South because many Blacks were following the program of the likes of Booker T. Washington, casting down their bucket where they were, and were experiencing relative success as a result of this. So the NAACP had a very tough time really convincing the Blacks in the South to kind of go along with what they were trying to do. And it wasn't until the rise of Martin Luther King, who was a son of the South, he was the son of a pastor, he was a Marxist, So he knew how to speak like a Southerner. He had that Southern charm and that, Southern kind of vibe about him. He was able to do for blacks in the South, or two blacks in the South, I should say, what the NAACP had a very tough time doing up until that point. And so,
let me ask you something about that, if I could jump in there. And I don't want you to, I know you have a question, Crystal. When you say Martin Luther King was a Marxist, do you? And I agree. I think there is definitely I think he believed in Marxism, but do you believe, or is there evidence to say that he was actually working with the Marxists and knew exactly what he was doing, or was he a pawn, and he's being played by the Marxists, or the red, and didn't know that he was being used to infiltrate and do what the Marxists wanted him to do?
The narrative that Martin Luther King was merely a pawn and he didn't know that he was being used in this way is one that a lot of Republicans like to use, so as to convince people that Martin Luther King was a Republican and that he just wanted to do what was right and he was really a good guy. They were the ones who used him, but the facts don't support that narrative at all. He knew full well what he was doing. He believed in Marxism from a very early age, going as far back, I would even say earlier than this, but his days at Crozer Theological Seminary, when he met Coretta Scott at the time, who later became Coretta Scott King, they were pen pals. They would write letters back and forth to each other. And, he told her, like, the social gospel, the social gospel is born out of this kind of Marxian ideology, is the gospel that I will preach to the world. He didn't believe in the resurrection of Christ. He didn't believe in the second coming. He thought the Bible was largely erroneous. He gave a sermon where he admitted that, I believe more in a kind of scientific worldview, which is a sophisticated way of saying that I believe in a more Darwinian kind of explanation of the world than a biblical explanation of the world, is basically all that means. His closest associates were Marxists. Stanley Levison, who was his publicist, he was the one who had a connection with the media. And so he was kind of the go-between between Martin Luther King and the media, as far as arranging the cameras to be in certain places at certain times when they would do these marches, because they understood the power of the media to manipulate the masses into going along with their movement and what it is they were trying to do. He being Stanley Levison was a Jewish Marxist who was a treasurer for a communist front group there in New York, a very wealthy man who paid Martin Luther King's all of his bills for the entire time he knew Martin Luther King. Bayard Rustin, who wrote a great deal of Martin Luther King's speeches, was a member of the Communist Party. And so again, Martin Luther King was very much aware of their Marxism, but he was very calculated in what he did, in the way that he kind of moved about. James Cone, the late James Cone, who they call the father of liberation theology, said of Martin Luther King that he was very much aware of this kind of red phobia that Americans had, this kind of thing that Americans had where they rejected communism. And so he wouldn't hint at his communism in his speeches, but he was very open about it to his staff in private conversations. James Cone said this. And so again, it wasn't this thing where he genuinely wanted what was right. Like, no, he saw his role as a pastor as being a kind of subversive thing to, in a sense, transition or shift people's theological understanding to where they might be more susceptible to a Marxian way of looking at the world, as opposed to a fundamental biblical way of looking at the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
but this is the way that that Satan moves, to in a sense take away from a true and deep understanding of the Word of God, and he does it by kind of twisting and tinkering with things here and there, so as to shift you more and more away from Christ. When you look at the Black community, especially in the South, prior to Martin Luther King's rise to popularity, many of the churches in the South were very fundamentalist in what they taught. They taught repentance. They taught, that you must be born again. They made Jesus the focus. This is what a lot of churches preached in the South. But it wasn't until after Martin Luther King's popularity that you began to see more and more churches embrace a social gospel, where the onus is not on you to repent and be born again, but rather the onus is on you to call the government to account, to call upon the government to have some kind of reckoning with the fact that it's racist and this, that, and the third. And so the onus is taken off of you as a sinner and is placed instead on what the government is or is not doing for you. And another thing that I think is worth mentioning, and I'll make this point really, really quickly, is that when you look at how Blacks were trending prior to the rise of Martin Luther King, as far as 3 out of 4 Black children being raised in a home with their mother and their father. When you look at the entrepreneurship of Black men, when you look at the fact that, again, across the board, the numbers were going in an upward trajectory. And the reason for that being that Blacks very much had this kind of Booker T. Washington-esque way of thinking and going about things. And so you see that happening prior to the 1960s, and then the rise of Martin Luther King, and then all of a sudden you see this rapid decline. And so what's the explanation for this increase suddenly becoming this decline? A lot of statisticians and data analysts would say, well, it's because of racism, or it's because of this, or it's because of that. A lot of Republicans would say, oh, it's LBJ and his war on poverty and his in the welfare state. But what I look at is a rhetoric of Martin Luther King and the other civil rights activists, namely that he was able to subversively shift the kind of mindset where the onus is no longer on me as a man to take responsibility for my own life and to provide for myself. And I'm now embittered because I'm learning from Martin Luther King, who's giving such speeches as there's 2 Americas. White people live on this island of plenty with a vast ocean of plenty that's flowing with milk and honey, whereas the Negro lives on an island that's desolate with despair. The Negro walks the streets daily, said Martin Luther King, searching for jobs that do not exist. And so when you have him using such rhetoric on the one hand, and you have such organizations as SNCC, which is an offshoot of Martin Luther King's movement, using such aggressive rhetoric, calling Black folks who are on the straight and narrow Uncle Toms and sellouts and all the rest, because rather than protesting against the system, they are utilizing the system. So when you have these kind of things happening in tandem, you naturally see, or you see as a result, this kind of decline, because if I'm taking my hand off the proverbial plow and I'm using those same hands to now pick up the picket sign, there's no real production that can come from the picket line or from the picket sign. Real production comes from putting your hands on the plow. And so sorry for my long-winded way of answering your questions, but I think all of these are important.
No, this is interesting. Yeah.
Crystal, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm such a fan of you, Chad, and your show. I watch it all the time. Blanche says he's like, never trust a man who has an excuse. He's like, you expect the Black man to be respected when you keep telling the Black woman every single day that you can't do nothing because of racism. So nobody's gonna ever respect you. I think that your message about Martin Luther King really just changed everything that I thought, and I was grateful for it. And you did it actually before Charlie Kirk. I wanted to put that little plug out. there for you. You did recently something that it has been on my mind, and it was the crisis of the Black Republican. And I appreciated it. I appreciated it so much because you explained how a lot of times African American or Black Republicans they want the left on the right. I'm stealing that from one of our producers. He says they want the left on the right. And I agree with that. But if I could be so blunt with you and say, you frustrate me and you get on my nerves, because in this political climate, where we have an election happening in November, you refuse to pick a side, and I need you to pick a side, and you won't, and I understand why, but I guess I want to know what your reasoning is behind that and what's the end goal. I understand what you're trying to do, and I know that the right side is not perfect, but at this point, what I'm hearing a lot of African American people making an excuse, they're two wings of the same bird, they're the same one. And I think strong men like you, when you don't pick a side, then it kind of gives them another excuse to not pick a side or continue to pick the same side that will help them keep their girlfriend or their wife happy. So I know that was a loaded question.
No, that's actually a really good question. In fact, I would argue that it's one of the best questions I've ever gotten.
Thank you.
Wow, where do I even begin? I'll try not to be as long-winded as my other answers. I have picked a side. And that side is that of Christ. The Bible tells me that I'm to be in the world, but not of it. And so it's interesting, when you look at politics, because I think a lot of us get it into our heads that if only our party gets into power, all of this will be straightened out. Everything will be good. When the reality is that's not the case. Our problem isn't Democrats or Republicans. Our problem is in the mirror.
Yeah.
And that's the message that I really hit on and drive home, because the fact is, when you look at the religious folks in Jesus's day and those who studied the scriptures, they construed or interpreted the scriptures to mean that the Messiah will come from this royal bloodline who would be born into a palace, or who would just appear, and he will overthrow the Roman Empire who's oppressing us and who is charging us these hefty taxes and this, that, and the third. And when he would immediately establish his kingdom on the earth, and everything will be good. So that's what they construed or interpreted the scriptures to mean. Rather, he came as a baby, as an infant, in an obscure town called Nazareth, born in a manger, or laid in a manger when he was born. And as he grew older, he taught in a way that no one has ever heard. He was performing these miracles, and it caused some of the folks to look and say, he might be the Messiah, but he didn't come in a way that I expected him to come. And so you had this kind of debate that was going on. And a lot of the folks back then had this kind of political view of Jesus, rising to power and overthrowing the government. And so, and even his disciples thought this. And this is the reason why they would argue amongst themselves who will sit at his right and who would sit at his left once he establishes his political kingdom. What they didn't realize is that Jesus's kingdom was not of this world. And so I think that's a very important message for us to take home today, where we realize Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. He came not to bring peace, but to bring a sword. And it's a sword that will separate families, separate friends, separate everyone, because to choose a side is to not choose Democrat or Republican, but to choose Christ or the world. It is really what it boils down to. And so I try to preach Christ and him crucified more so than the virtues and the value of the Republican Party. A lot of what Black Republicans believe about the Republican Party as being the champion of the Black cause and this and the third, it's kind of a half truth, because the reality is when you look at the history of the Republican Party, they were just as complicit in the demoralization and the decline of Western civilization as the Democrats.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. It's not a matter of it's not a matter of not wanting to like be principled and being wishy-washy. It's not a matter of that. It's just acknowledging an objective fact that both are responsible and complicit in the decline of Western civilization. I know that many of us, we like to, for the sake of, I think a lot of us, we treat politics much like, a football game where you pick your favorite team and you have your favorite players, you have your quarterback, your running back. And so for this reason, we attach ourselves to the likes of, man, how do I say this without trying to seem like I'm hating on somebody? I'm just going to go for it. So like, oh yeah. Okay. So Candace Owens, she's articulate. Ben Shapiro, he's articulate. Dave Rubin, he's articulate. So these are our kind of, and I'm leaving people out. So basically we need these people who are on our team. And to the extent that they get on social media and roast the left, we got our points in the proverbial football or basketball game. So a lot of us treat politics like that, when the reality is even bigger than the cultural war that's raging. Even bigger than that is a spiritual war that's raging. And so, frankly, Christ doesn't doesn't care about your political labels. He cares about souls. And so I think a lot of us, we spend more time engaging in the cultural war, engaging in the kind of political warfare that we spend very little time preaching Christ and Him crucified. And so to the extent that I engage, I literally have a show called Cutting Through the Culture. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I don't talk about culture. I do. But my involvement or my voice in the matter is to look at the ways in which we have gone awry and to, again, bring it back to the cross, bring it back to the scripture, and ask, what saith the Lord in this particular situation, in this particular circumstance? And to be honest with you, this is a reason why I'm critical of Martin Luther King, because he's someone who placated, who masqueraded as a pastor when really he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. And so, yes, I'm going to be critical of that because the Bible tells us to test every spirit to see if it's of God. And so I do pick a side. It just isn't the side that many people want us to be. Now, do I vote?
I was going to ask you that. Should we vote?
Yes,
I was going to ask you practically, should we vote?
We should. It will be a dereliction of duty as citizens of this country to not vote. But my thing is, I have no illusions about what my vote means. My voting for Donald Trump, which I'm going to vote for Donald Trump in November, but my voting for Donald Trump isn't some kind of expectation for him to turn the country around and make things right. Because at the end of the day, the onus is on us in a constitutional republic to make for peace, structure, and stability in our land. That's more on us. We can't punt that responsibility to Trump or to the governor or to the mayor or whomever. But we do a very poor job as citizens of this country holding our elected officials accountable. And so for all the complaining we do about who's in office and AOC and this, that, and the other, really, once again, we have no one but ourselves to blame because we do a piss poor job preserving and conserving our country. We just do. We punt the responsibility to the politicians, and the politicians, many of them are corrupt. There's a disconnect between the grassroots folks who fight for Republican values at the ground level and the politicians who are actually in office. There is a uniparty that's going on. Make no mistake about it.
For sure.
And so again, it's up to that grassroots to hold the politicians accountable. But the fact is, the politicians are beholden to the highest bidders, to their donors, and to the bureaucracy, and that's real. Politics is a very cutthroat game, and so again, us arguing on social media over who or which politicians are the best, meanwhile they're in the back room laughing, or they're behind the closed doors laughing at us because really they're all on the same team.
And when you mention the arguing within social media, a lot of that arguing that we see is due to racial tension and race, especially within the Black community. And one thing we've talked about on the show is how we see that the Black community idolizes race It's almost like this idolatry within race. And that's not of Christ, is it not? And I want to get your thoughts on that. And then the idea behind DEI now. We're being pushed with this DEI, which seems to be sort of like a racial bias, another way to push racial bias. What are your thoughts there as well?
So you asked 2 questions. So one about DEI and the other about
race, this idolatry. It seems
idolatry of race.
Idolatry.
And it's interesting that you asked those 2 questions together, because I think therein lies the answer: the idolatry of race. The fact is, I think many of us need to ask ourselves, what comes into our mind when we think of Black? What does that mean? What does Black mean? And I think what we'll find, if we're being honest with ourselves, is that Blackness is an identity, not that we genuinely feel, but it's an identity that's been handed down to us. The question is, by whom? Black culture was made in a Hollywood basement. It was made in Hollywood. It's not real. When you look at, and I've done a great deal of research on basically how Blacks were trending from the end of slavery till the 1960s. And the reality is, there was very little distinction between Black folks, especially in the South, and white folks, based upon socioeconomic status. And so it's not until you get closer to the 1970s that you see this insisting upon a different kind of subculture as far as Black is concerned. You see the popularization of Blaxploitation films. You see it in the music. Marvin Gaye was a part of this. James Brown was a part of this. Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. You see the airing of Roots. You see this focus on Blackness, the growing your hair out into an afro, the wearing of African garb, the naming our children non quote unquote American names. And so again, like, all of this is deliberately intended to create this. Am I still on?
We can hear you.
Okay.
It looks like you may have lost the. Did we have it?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'll keep going. But a lot of this is intended to my camera's doing something weird. So a lot of this is intended to create a subculture, to manufacture a subculture, and it is that subculture that comes to mind when people think of Black. And so, moving on to the DEI piece, with DEI, well, first of all, it's important to acknowledge the fact that this manufacturing of Black culture is, for all intents and purposes, a very Marxian thing. Right. Not only are you getting a new image, you're also getting a new ideology. The Black Panthers, for example, were at the forefront of this new image. When you look at Angela Davis and Huey P. Newton and H. Rap Brown and others, they were lauding Mao's Red Book and Marxian rhetoric. And so not only are you getting an image, you're getting an ideology. And so a lot of Black folks believe in Marxism. There was a poll done by Cato Institute in 2019 where they asked different ethnicities, which do you favor more, capitalism or socialism? And Black folks are the only ethnicity that had a higher view of socialism than capitalism. And that, once again, is due to the manufacturing of a new culture, a new way of identifying. And so when you push,
if I could,
I wanted to ask something. But
MLK, was MLK the one to start us off this road? Do you believe that, or was it before?
MLK didn't start it. He he was able to catapult it. I will say, when you read literature from Vladimir Lenin from 1928. When talking about America, he said that the Negroes are basically the ones that we should be targeting because
Chad, I'm sorry. That's why I was going to ask you. I'm sorry. Why Black people, or why Negroes? Why was that group selected, or why were we selected?
because the slavery piece was still kind of fresh on a lot of people's mind, for one. Not only that, but again, in the name of tribalism, where people were being kept out of certain spaces. And it wasn't just a Black thing. It was, again, a thing of people's differences. There's signs where they kept Italians out. I mean, I still have images where, restaurants had no Italians and no dogs allowed. So, or no Irish allowed. The Chinamen not allowed. So we, in our schooling, only see the no Negroes allowed, or Negroes enter through back only, or Negroes see in the balcony. So we see those signs, but we don't see the other signs. And again, this has a lot to do with tribalism. And so when you can use that imagery, and you can use the history of slavery, that creates a kind of ready-made endpoint, or endpoint to agitate and to organize for political purposes. Because if I can embitter you, I can then get you to do whatever I want, if that makes sense. So I mean, Vladimir Lenin acknowledged that as early as 1928, and as a result of this, the Soviet Union set off to infiltrate Black agitative or Black activists, so as to utilize them for their own political purposes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I do believe that at the time, because of what we went through, we were the easiest to manipulate. I really don't think it has anything to do with our skin color. We even see it now, like with the police movement. I mean, like when they started with the whole in music with the F the police, and then people started sharing their experience with bad policing. Like, you see people that live in, they live in suburbs like I do, telling me about a police that threw them up against the car. And I looked at one of them and I said, that never happened to you. He got so upset with me. He was like, how are you trying to tell me? He was like, I was playing in the park and the police stopped me and threw me up against. I said, that never happened to you.
If you guys don't mind, I'm actually going to have to refresh. It's telling me I need to refresh in order for my camera to come back on.
Okay.
Okay,
we'll wait for you. We'll talk while you do that.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, very interesting. I hope you guys are enjoying the chat tonight. Again, this is Poppin' Politics. This is our special program tonight on a Monday. We are generally here on Wednesdays at 8 p.m., but we're live tonight with Chad O. Jackson, talking about Marxism, talking about DEI and the legacy of MLK, which is Marxism. So I want to show this clip, since we were talking about DEI, and get you guys comment on this. So this is actually, she's talking about reparations. So this is Congresswoman. What's her name again? I'm sorry.
Jasmine Crockett, I think.
Yes, Jasmine Crockett.
Big.
Okay, talking about reparations, and then I want to get you guys to respond to this. Let me see here.
Hi, everyone. We're back again with the Black Lawyers Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing the one, the only Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate you.
So many people. You have so many fans, first of all. So tell us, but before we get into your journey, I kind of make everyone do.
1 second. I'm just playing.
Terrible lace front, girlfriend. I got 2 words for you. Leave out.
We're back again with the Black Lawyers Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing the one, the only Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate you.
So many people. You have so many fans, first of all. So tell us, but before we get into your journey, I kind of make everyone do legal hot topics. I know you're probably familiar with Wendy Williams' hot topics. So we're going to do 2 hot topics that have kind of been trending One of them being UVA, which is actually my school. It would be my school. Is the second school now behind Colorado to decide that they're not going to no longer have legacy admission.
Sorry.
So we already know about the big Supreme Court.
I thought I had the clip here, but basically, she is a congresswoman, and she is advocating for reparations via taxes. So she suggested in this interview that Black Americans should not have to pay taxes for a particular amount of time due to reparations. That would be the reparations for Black Americans to not have to pay taxes. Want to get your thoughts on that. I'll start with you, Chad. This idea of reparations, once again, and you mentioned the whole idea behind us picking ourselves up from our bootstraps, and we just continue as a community begging. It feels like it's all the time. When are you going to get reparations? You know, even the people who say they're going to vote for Trump. I like Trump because he gave out the Trump checks.
The Trump checks.
I mean, what is this? What's going on? And why? I wanted to ask you what you thought about that, and then where does this extend from?
Again, I mean, it's this state solution, this government solution to all of our problems, which started with the civil rights movement. Or I should say what was popularized with the civil rights movement, because it started before that with the NAACP and a lot of the agitative things that they were doing there in New York and in Harlem more specifically. But again, Martin Luther King was able to take this kind of practice and nationalize it to a point where, you know, again, today, a lot of what we do in the name of social justice and agitation is predicated from the civil rights movement. A lot of it stems from that. DEI stems from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Affirmative action stems from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A lot of what you see in the way of reparations stems from that as well. Martin Luther King talked a lot about, like, when, you know, a lot of white Europeans came to America, they were given land, they were given this, they were given that. Meanwhile, the Negro was left out. So he's kind of making the case for reparations, which was a battle that they saw as one that you get to later on. We must first get this legislation passed. So it's this kind of retraining the Black mind to, instead of looking to oneself to advance in society, to look to state-based solutions. And we haven't moved from that place ever since. You know, Black marriage rates are a mess right now. They just are. But one marriage that that has stayed intact since the 1960s is a marriage between Black America and the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
And that wedding was officiated by Martin Luther King. And so he officiated this wedding to a party that promises such things as DEI and other kind of mechanisms to try to rectify or to make whole the Black man and the Black woman. But these are all futile measures that will never really accomplish anything, because if you're looking for a state solution to your problems, you'll always have your hand out. You'll never be satisfied. You'll never be made whole. And so this whole reparations thing is a joke. And who are we kidding? When it comes to this, you know, let's say Black folks received all these reparations, then what? The damage is already done. If you don't possess the mindset to know how to manage wealth, then you're going to find yourself back at square one. You're going to actually be in a worse off situation than you were before you got the reparations, because now you're going to have debt. So anyway.
I mean, that happened with the COVID checks.
Right.
Yeah. So Chad, I want to piggyback a little bit. I'm going to kind of try to read this in together. Now, my first question to you was about conservatives or conservatism. And I asked you that on purpose because even in some of your explanations and the questions we've asked, you kind of touched on that, you know, Republicans are not doing much differently or much better. And I criticize our side a lot, right? I criticize my side. And you are saying some of the things that I say, you know, it starts with us, you know, the individual. We need to look in the mirror. And because we do it a little bit less, we think that, oh, the other side is fully worse. Now, granted, I know the left is evil and they're loony. They're loony. But can you give us some examples of how we, because I want to talk about the man in the mirror, how our side, I guess I'm going to say, does it wrong, or how we don't do what we should be doing?
That's a really good question. So basically, one of the things that the left, or that the social scientists and cognitive scientists and social engineers, I should say, one of the things that they've managed to do was to inject this kind of premise of thinking, this kind of foundation, if you will, of thinking that's shared by both the right and the left. We all start from the same place. And we start from the same place by virtue of the fact that we all go to the same schools. We all listen to the same music. We all have the same basic understanding of the world. And many of our terminology, many of our vocabulary has in it a lot of Marxist words. The word capitalism is a Marxist word. The working class is a Marxist word. So we are, for all intents and purposes, kind of influenced by a Marxian way of thinking. And the Republican Party, rather than historically resisting that and calling that out and fighting against it, they have, in a sense, acquiesced to it and have proceeded or carried on as if they have no spine, as if they have no backbone. And to the extent that you had these bold men who stepped up and dared to do something about it, they were slapped down by their own party, the likes of McCarthy, the likes of Barry Goldwater, and others. And so, in a sense, to not be called a bigot or a racist or a sexist or a homophobe or whatever the case may be, the majority of the Republican Party will acquiesce to the parameters and to the refereeing laid forth by the so-called left. And so there really is no spine, once again. And so the Republican Party has time and again failed when it comes to preserving or conserving the edicts of the Constitution. When you see the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, most of the Republicans should have gone the way of Barry Goldwater, who voted against the legislation because the legislation was unconstitutional. It just was. Specifically Title II and Title VII. I'm a business owner myself. I don't want the government, the federal government, telling me who I can and can't hire or who I can and can't serve. That should be left up to me as a business owner. I should be able to do so on my own discretion. Now, if I choose to openly say, you know, I'm not going to serve this group of people or that group of people, the marketplace should have the right to spend their dollars with me or to withhold their dollars from my business. That's the way the free market works. If people want to be bigots or whatever, they should have the right to do so. And as far as the marketplace is concerned, let the chips fall where they may. But this government or state solution to always step in these places only makes matters worse, and it just does. I mean, when you look at the Communist Manifesto, when you look at the desires of Karl Marx, what communists wish to do is to, in a sense, eradicate and abolish private property. To completely eradicate it. A entrepreneur is the quintessence of private property, of doing for oneself. And so what the Civil Rights Act of 1964 did was it gave the government just a little bit more power and a little bit more control in your private owned business. The issue was that the states were being unconstitutional insofar that they were mandating who these businesses can and can't serve, which doors these businesses can and can't, or had to allocate for blacks versus whites and this, that, and the other. That was what the states were doing was unconstitutional. The answer to that is to not pass another unconstitutional piece of legislation, which, you know what I mean? That wasn't the answer. But when it comes to people like Bob Woodson, a man whom I respect, who made the point even back then that we shouldn't be fighting for integration, but rather desegregation. Those are two completely different things. Mm-hmm. These people were ignored, and all the attention and accolades were given to the likes of Martin Luther King, who once again was pushing for a kind of state-based solution, which goes hand in hand with Marxism.
Demonic.
Yes, because something we get into heated debates about here is prostitution. And so, some of us are of the mindset that government, yes, I'm going to bring it up. The government should not be in it at all. It should not be regulated because of the free market system. And then some of us say the opposite, say that it's not a conservative mindset to say that because of the latent effects of prostitution.
Chad, can I speak for myself? I am of the mindset that prostitution, the government should not regulate it. If a woman and a pimp want to make a contract with each other, the government doesn't have to do that. If they are of age, if they are adults, they are in their right minds, there's no force, fraud, or coercion. I am of that mindset.
Well, y'all kind of put me on the spot.
I know, right?
So, I mean, some might call me a small government kind of absolutist. And I don't know that fits me to a T. I do believe that there are laws that are mal and prohibita. In other words, the local local government, which is, I think, the most the local government should be the form of government that is the most closely attached to the people within a particular context. And so if, for the sake of maintaining some degree of sanctity, of dignity, of classiness within a local context means outlawing prostitution within that context, that is a perfectly constitutional move or measure as far as that's concerned. Whereas the federal government stepping in and saying, that prostitution is abolished across the land, I don't know. I mean, that's a tricky one because, I mean, I don't want a lot of whores running around. I mean, that's just me. But
me too.
I don't either. But I still say that the government, if you want to say the federal government, those are two adults that they can make a private contract. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying I would go out and even advocate for prostitutes to be on the corner like some people think I would do. But I don't want the government to regulate that much of our personal lives to that degree between two adults who are making a private contract. That's
I just think the results of it. So I'm kind of with Chad because I do believe in small government and I'm a small government. I absolutely.
That's what I mean. I am too.
However, I do believe in shame. I do believe in we need to have a certain decorum of our way of life. This is what we do. And for a while, America had that. And
that would be the local level, like he's talking about.
And it's so sad to see the degeneracy just popping up and nobody ever says anything. It's just kind of like it's always been that way. Yeah. So with that being said, to piggyback off of Shelley's question, I think the conservatives or the Republican Party, I always say I vote Republican, but I'm not a Republican. The Republicans are having a really hard time defining what it means to be a Republican and even understanding it, especially with KJ. She says she hates the big tent party because all these people coming in with their thoughts and with the way they used to do it.
Populism.
If you had to advise the core of our group, the true conservatives, the true people that want to preserve our republic, what do you think that you would describe the role of government is and how we should stick to that?
Mm-hmm. Well, biblically speaking, we know that that God has ordained government. And so I think a lot of people kind of erroneously take this anarchist view where they want government completely out of the lives of the people and this, that, and the third. So, I mean, I think that there's a balance to be acknowledged when it comes to the role of government in our lives. The fact is, we sit here in 21st century Western civilization, very comfortable, and it hasn't been this way for the majority of humanity. And so, you know, one of the luxuries that we have is to see the rise and fall of numerous governments from the beginning. And additionally, we have the Holy Bible. We have the scripture, which establishes a government in the days of Moses, brought down from Mount Sinai. And they were governed by judges. And in a desire to look like the pagan nations that surrounded them, they demanded a king, and they got their king, and all hell broke loose thereafter.
That's what I say. Black folks just need a king. They just got to have a king.
Yeah, they got to have their ML king. And so when it's interesting because, you know, we are wayward people. We are wicked people. And as such, for the sake of protecting a neighbor from his neighbor, you need to have established law, so as to have some degree of peace and dignity in the land. And so we need government in that respect, because if we didn't have government, we'd be a wasteland. And so what are the functions of that government? And this is a question that I think the founding fathers were desperately trying to figure out. And the kind of debate over federalism versus anti-federalism. It's so complex and so nuanced when you look at the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. And while there are great points in both, I would tend to be more of an anti-federalist, because I believe in the sovereignty of the states. And more specifically, I believe in the sovereignty of the township. And even more specifically, I believe in the sovereignty of the family.
Yes.
And so I think that the founding fathers did get it right, because, I mean, because of the anti-federalists, that's how you were able to get the Bill of Rights, to put parameters on the reach of the federal government. And so, like, it's not, I don't think it's incumbent upon me to try to come up with, out of my, a great wisdom, some new form of government. Like, no, I think the founding fathers got it right, and we should be working to get back to that. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, as it were. We just need to get back to the Constitution. Yeah. And I think, to answer your question about my message to Republicans, I think that we should work to get back to the edicts of the Constitution. Stop letting the so-called left be the referees and dictate and determine and do what they do in terms of acknowledging where the goal lines are. Like, I think that we need to be offensive. We need to be offensive, and we need to lead with our shoulders in terms of getting back to the edicts of the Constitution. Now, I will say that is a kind of pie in the sky dream. It is a pipe dream, and it's a pipe dream because we at this point in American history, we're so far gone, and our conscience is seared. We have a seared conscience, and our seared conscience is thanks to this kind of postmodern way of thinking. Yeah. And what I mean by postmodernism is this idea that there's no such thing as truth, that everybody has their own truth. The truth is subjective. You can be what you want to be. You can believe what you want to believe. What's the old saying? To each their own.
Oh yeah.
Right? But I think what they mean to say is to each their own way to hell. I think that's what they mean to say.
Or to each their own way for you, and we're going to put you out of our community.
Right. So to each their own way to hell. In other words, there are many ways to get to hell, but there's only one way to get to heaven, and that's Christ. But it's not a matter of just saying, it's Christ. Like, that's actually a very daunting task to follow Christ, because a lot of us just want Christ to be our savior. We don't want him to be our Lord. Yeah. We don't want him to be our Lord. We want for him to be the scapegoat for my wickedness, but I don't want him to be Lord over my life, dictating what I do and don't do, where I do and don't go, who I, you know what I mean? All these things.
Right.
We want to live life how we want to live it. It's kind of like a vaccine, right? If I take this vaccine, I can eat what I want to eat. I can choose not to exercise because the vaccine is going to protect me. Well, no, like when it comes to the so-called anti-vaxxers, which none of my children are vaccinated, but it's not enough just to not get vaccinated. You still have to live a healthy life. You still have to work out. You still have to do these things. So you can't call yourself an anti-vaxxer if you're eating cheeseburgers every day, right? It's a matter of not choosing the easy way out, but at the same time doing the work of I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think my point is made.
No, that was very good. You said doing the work. We always say that's like a thing the left says a lot now, doing the work.
Yeah, doing the work. you need to go educate yourself.
Right.
It's so foolish.
Yeah.
Wow.
But no, I appreciate what you said because we laugh all the time. It's just sometimes conservative. I did this thing called conservative courage because we all were like previously Democrat. I mean, we're Black. It was like we were born into it.
Yeah.
Baptized and filled with the Democrat. Like that's what we were. And so now we came over here and we remember how bold we were on that side. And then you come over here and you're like, y'all punks, y'all gonna let them say that to you? You gonna let them change, And I don't even think a lot of the Republicans even think that they are. Like they really think that they giving it to you. And I'm like, you just changed your whole message because somebody called you a racist. Like you just changed your whole message because somebody said you were privileged.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting, Chad, because earlier in one of your comments or one of your responses, you basically described all three of us as, even though we're all on the right, you said that, there are some conservatives or Republicans, people on the right that represent more traditional values. Some of us represent, want to go back to the Constitution more so, and then others take more of an economic approach. You basically described all three of us in that comment. So, but overall, what are we supposed to be doing? I mean, what do we do as a culture, if you will, as Black people, as Americans? What are we supposed to be doing to get our country back on track, if we can?
I mean, I really think the answer is more simple than what you might be wanting to hear. Does that make sense?
No, I just want to hear I want to hear it.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're gonna say. I bet you I know what you.
I know. I think I did too. But go ahead.
No, I think the answer is more simple because the thing is like, before I answer the question, let me just say that it's interesting to sit back and watch how people reacted to the whole lockdown and COVID and this, that, and the other. Right? It was very interesting to sit back and watch that. The fact that people had to pull their children out of school and sit them down in front of a computer, and the frustration that came along with that, the fact that people had to work from home, and it was weird and interesting to watch it because, like, for me, my life wasn't affected at all. As a business owner who had a say in how my business reacts to COVID, namely that we didn't react at all. We just kept on with business as usual. We didn't have to shut down. We didn't have to do anything. And not only that, since my kids are already homeschooled, we didn't have to pull them out of no school. You know what I mean? So all that to say, like, my life isn't as affected by government decisions as most people's. And so I think the realization that you have control over your own life is one that goes over many people's head. And I think the reason why so many people have so much stock in what the government does and don't do is because they're so intertwined with government decisions that it affects them more potently than those of us who have chosen to detach ourselves from government overreach. And so are we practicing what we preach as conservatives? If we're complaining about the schools,
pull them out.
What sense does it make to constantly take your kids or put them on that yellow bus to go to the school every
we say it all the time.
Right. Again, I mean, you name it, the list goes on and on and on. And so, like, for us, we have to practice what we preach. And I think this is the problem with many churches today as well, where we want so badly to win people that we become like the world, as opposed to being the church and being God's people and having fun being us, being who we are supposed to be. And so I think we need to get back to family values, not just fronting, not just, playing on social media like we're about that life. Like, no, we need to really be who we claim to be, because that's attractive. That is attractive.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the thing is, like, why is it that 1 in 3 students today identify as LGBT? Why is that? Well, because they make it look fun.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, they are doing what they do, and they're putting a lot of marketing behind it and propaganda behind it. And that, unfortunately, is attractive to a lot of our youth. And I think a lot of us as Christians are scared to, like, live how we claim and how we boast about, for one. And for two, we're not really about that life. We're about that life on social media, but not in reality. And so I think really what it boils down to is getting back, like, even as conservatives, like, are we genuinely small government? If so, then why are we so mixed up in what the government is or isn't doing for us? Are we genuinely about small businesses? Well, are we spending our money with local businesses, or are we going to Walmart every time we need groceries? You know what I mean? So like, we really have to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak. I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for, but that's what comes out to me.
Perfect.
No, it's helpful. Yeah.
My final question for you of the night is, we get a lot of people, and we hear a lot of people say Black people are really conservative, but they vote Democrat. Do you believe that? Do you believe that Black people are?
I don't either anymore.
I don't. Nope.
No, I don't.
I don't either anymore. I used to. I don't anymore.
Very unethical.
Let me try to see if I can't get this situated.
Okay.
I just bought this camera yesterday. I wonder why it keeps.
Oh no.
I'm gonna have to return it. Like, it says that it's overheating.
Oh no.
Yeah. So
you bought a camera just for our show. Oh, we feel so special, Chad.
All right. Well, final thoughts, ladies. Any final questions you have for Chad?
No, I mean, this was, well, I will, not a question, but I will say this. I'm sure you already know that you are not the only Uncle Tom. We have been called Uncle Tom. I've been called Uncle Tom over 20-something years. I've not been a Democrat longer than they have been, but I think we even call ourselves sometimes Aunt Toms or whomever, right?
Kunisha, that's me.
You go.
Tamisha. Tamisha's the Black version.
No, Kunisha. Somebody called me.
Kunisha.
Oh, Kunisha.
Oh,
and I thought that was so cute. I was like, oh,
hey, I'll take it. No, I've been called Uncle Ruckus and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Whenever what's that white girl's name who plays for Iowa?
Oh, Caitlin
Clark. My brother's really big into sports, and he was talking about Caitlin Clark, and I said it just warmed my heart to see that white girl beat all those Black women on that basketball court. He said you Uncle Ruckus. No, but as far as your question, I'm sorry, I had to yeah. So as far as your question about, like, Blacks being naturally conservative, that's not true. It just isn't true. I mean, the fact is like, I mean, if they are saying that a lot of Black folks grew up in church, yes, that is true. But the message that many of us heard in church was that of a social gospel, that of liberation theology, which is rooted in Marxism, which teaches anything but conservatism. The fact is, the Black dollar doesn't circulate in the Black community for long before it's somewhere else. If you were genuinely conservative, that dollar would last longer in these predominantly Black communities than it does. The fact is, 70+% of Black children are growing up in single parent households. There's nothing conservative about that. when it comes to family values, which is, I think, a edict of conservatism, or what we think of when we think of conservatism, there is not as much investment in the education of our young as with other communities, be they Asian or what have you. And so when you look down the list of what is we traditionally think of when we think of conservative values, Black culture unfortunately does not fit the bill. And if it did, then it would show not only in our voting habits, but also in the way that we treat each other. It will show in our entertainment and other such things. And the fact is, a lot of Black folks, unfortunately, have this kind of built-in state solution-oriented way of thinking about our problems. Whereas when you see, for example, foreigners come to America, be they Hispanic or what have you, they're not ashamed to live, 2 or 3 families in one house and support each other on their way to financial success. And then they move out and then they help. And then they're very strategic in the way that they lift each other up and build each other up and I'm not trying to romanticize these other cultures. I'm just saying they do something better than we do. That's not to say that they're perfect. That is to say, that is to give honor to whom honor is due and acknowledging success. The thing is, why not give people their due? And there's, unfortunately, there's not a lot I can look at when it comes to modern Black culture that I'm pleased with.
American Black culture.
American Black culture. Right. There's not a lot that I can look to that I'm pleased with, especially when you compare it to Black culture prior to the 1960s.
Right.
We have abandoned the way of our grandparents, and we chose this new artificial kind of faux fast food version, this manufactured version of Black culture, and we're suffering as a result. And there's not a lot of redeemable qualities of it. The only way to really turn the ship around is to abandon and reject this new version of so-called Black culture, and to get back to the way we were back then.
Right.
And again, I echo what I said earlier, which is to say that my concern is that we're too far gone to do so. Something cataclysmic would have to happen in order for us to really fall on our knees. But the fact is, there's so many white liberals. There's so many. There's so much pandering that happens in American politics that there will always be this kind of presence that reminds Black folks oh, poor babies, we'll take care of you. And so long as you have that, so long as you de-incentivize that survival instinct that is built into all of us, so long as we never have to lean on that because there will always be somebody to pander to us, that is once again one of the reasons why I think I don't see this turning around anytime soon as far as Black culture is concerned.
Wow. I do have one more question. I'm sorry. I do, because I'm saying we collectively, at least on the right, if you will, we're Black conservatives in particular, we're often asked, what made you come to this side, or what was the spark, if you will, that brought you out of our being born into the Democrat Party, right? What would you say it would be for you? What made you, I don't know if you ever were a Democrat, but what made you have this spark, if you will, to come? And I'm just going to use on the right in general, just loosely.
Well, it's downstream of my faith. I know you guys said that y'all watched Uncle Tom, and that's actually my genuine story, where I was challenged by a friend to read the Republican Party platform at the time and the Democrat Party platform at the time. Of course, they change every 4 years by way of committee and so on. But at the time, I remember reading them and being a devout Christian, realizing that the Democrat Party doesn't actually support any of my values. So therefore, I must be a Republican. But I later kind of graduated from that way of thinking and realizing that both parties are just pandering and placating. None of them, as far as again, I must reiterate, on the grassroots level, a lot of Republicans genuinely believe what it is they say they believe. But again, at the elected office level, a lot of them don't believe what's in that platform, to be honest. But again, so like Crystal, although I do tend to vote for Republicans, I'm not a Republican. But yeah, my political worldview is downstream of my faith, because my faith dictates every aspect of my life. Of course, I'm not perfect. I'm not claiming to be, but I'm saying that I see the scriptures as a final arbitration on all matters, including politics.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I think the Black church needs to do that. Like you guys, like the Black church has just steered so far away from it. I guess my final thoughts, and it's not a final question, is please forgive me. The residuals of Black culture is still in me, because I shouldn't have talked about that girl wig like that. It was just so rude. Father, forgive me, Chad. It was so ghetto. And I would like to point out the fact that he said he's voted for Trump.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. All right.
Yeah.
I do have one more question. This is the last one. My question is, what has the reception been like regarding your comments about MLK? Because even with this, when I posted this tonight, people were like, what would Alveda King think? And how dare you say that about MLK? What have you, and how do we move on? How do we move past this? I mean, because he's in schools, you know, he's like the one everyone goes to, you know. How do we move past it? How do we go on?
Well, you talk to who's willing to listen, really. And to my surprise, because here's the thing, when it comes to the release of Uncle Tom, the first film, I had little to do with it in terms of like the production of it and everything. I was merely interviewed for it, and for those of you who have watched Uncle Tom Part 2, you'll notice that it's very different, and it doesn't march to the same beat of the drum that is laid out in Part 1. Now, when it came to the making of Part 2, I was asked to come on to be a producer for the film, since I am an independent researcher. And so I said, yes, I'll do it if I get to tell the story that I want to tell. Because by this point, I've realized a lot of things about the civil rights movement, about Martin Luther King, about the difference between Black culture in yesteryear versus Black culture now. And so there's a lot of things that we're coming to realize at this time in my life. And said, you know, I don't want to talk about the same old Black Republican talking points. The Democrats are the real racists. They're the party of the KKK and Jim Crow and all this other nonsense. I wanted to tell the story that I wanted to tell. And so they agreed. Larry Elder, who's the executive producer of the film, had some it was challenging for him, because then he had some like a nostalgic kind of attachment to the civil rights movement. Although, you know, that's a different story for a different day. The same is true of Carol Swain. And so I have to stick to my guns and like really like show my research and show my evidence and this, that, and the third. And there was some internal kind of conflict as far as that's concerned, but ultimately we released Part 2. It wasn't exactly the film that I wanted to release. I wanted to really go all the way when it came to Black Wall Street, because there's a lot to that story that a lot of people miss. I really wanted to go all the way when it came to Martin Luther King, but the director of the film wanted to leave it as a cliffhanger. So left up to me, we would have just gone all the way in.
Don't do it.
That just means you have more work to do.
Right. So we ended up releasing Part 2, and I'm happy with it. Dr. Carol Swain, she had the most verbal pushback against the film. But over time, she's warmed up to it. And in fact, the last major event that she had in Tennessee, she invited me to come down and be a speaker. So when it comes to baby boomers, I think a lot of them have a nostalgic view of the civil rights movement. And that I think is thanks to the craftiness of the movement and how they really use a church as an incision point for this ideology. And a lot of people don't realize it's kind of like a frog, a boiling frog analogy, where a lot of people just don't realize how their faith was really subverted. And so you try to hang on to Martin Luther King, who himself wasn't a Christian, or at least in the fundamentalist sense, and who really kind of push a kind of covert Marxian message. So you're trying to hang on to this mythological figure on the one hand, because the legacy of Martin Luther King is a mythology. It's not real. They called him the moral leader of our day. They called him that in the 60s. Meanwhile, he's having sex with hookers every night. You know what I mean? So it's like, and snorting coke lines, and like it gets crazy. So
a hamburger.
Yeah, exactly. And a cup of coffee. But he said, yeah, I shared that clip with Blanche, and he's been using it ever since. But
I love it.
he was asked, what was it that you weren't able to do when you were young? And Martin Luther King said, well, I couldn't go to a store and get myself a cup of coffee or a hamburger.
Of all the things, like I wasn't able to read, I wasn't able to write, I couldn't go to church. I couldn't go get a cup of coffee and a hamburger.
And in honor, I watched Uncle Tom 1 and 2. I actually, purchased them from the Salem, I think the Salem channel, or the Salem site or whatever. So I've watched them a couple of times each. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, I bought this book because you mentioned it about the black, the photographer.
Oh yeah,
in the
yeah.
So I purchased this book when I saw Uncle Tom 2, and I do have it in my collection. So I just wanted to show you this.
Nice. Did you get the Harlem book as well?
No, I didn't get the Harlem book.
Okay.
I got to put that on my list then.
I don't know if you remember, but in the film we show the book. It's also a picture book of Harlem from its inception till around about the 60s, and the early years of Harlem, because Harlem used to be predominantly white, and then a protege of Booker T. Washington named Philip Payton. He went to Harlem as a realtor and started buying all these buildings, and a lot of other black realtors started doing the same. So they were able to darken Harlem. Wow. And a lot of the folks who were moving to Harlem were black families and business executives. And so its early years, it was very productive, but then it was subverted in the 1920s during the so-called Harlem Renaissance, which we're told was this good and expression of black art, when really all it was was a demoralization tactic, where and not only that, but there was a lot of Marxian influence and agitation going on even then in Harlem, and so they were able to rapidly decline as a result of that. And so we make the point that what Booker T. Washington and his contingent built, W.E.B. Du Bois and his contingent destroyed as it relates to Harlem. But anyway, in this book, in the earlier pictures, you see the smiling faces, you see the black folks dressed to the nines, and then as you get closer to the end of the book, you see angry black folks later, in the later years, the latter years of Harlem. So that's also a good book to get.
Okay, I'll look at that one too. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I mean, we can see by the comments, everyone is getting a great education, learning things they didn't know previously. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Sorry for the camera malfunctions.
That's okay. We'll work it out.
Yeah.
We appreciate you, just taking the time. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Right. Thank you.
Right.
Have a nice night.
You too. Yes, have a nice night.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah. Well, you guys, you can certainly check out his website. His name, Chad O. Jackson. You can stay up to date with Chad O. Jackson. Also, you can check him out on YouTube by the same name. He has a YouTube page as well, so certainly check him out there. Any final thoughts, ladies?
Just this was just a great discussion, conversation, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of nuggets, if you will, that that anybody can take and pick up and just use for education, for research, to keep learning. It's just a lot. It's what do you call it? It's chock full. This was chock full.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Crystal, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to keep going. Like, I just think that, the Chads represent the possibility that a lot of Black men, when I think about the Black men, I think about, you remember the movie Moana, and at the end, the lady, she's like crawling and Moana singing that song saying, they've stolen the heart from inside you. You don't know who you are, but I know who you are. And I keep saying that that's men. Like, I really want men to understand that whatever happened to them stole the hearts of them, but they could really save our community, save our children if they just kind of knew what was inside of them. And people like Chad, people like Blanche, people like Larry Elder just give me such great hope. People like my husband, Matt, give me such great hope for the future of our men.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt kind of it's a lot. When you think about everything that we've been programmed to think, I was a history minor in college and big advocate of all of reading, Harlem Renaissance books and the art that came out during that season. And then MLK. I mean, when you think about all of this stuff that you've been taught and told, throughout the years, to hear that it was just, it was not just a lie, but it was part of some type of program scheme, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
A scheme. It's a lot. It is a lot, I think.
It is a lot. It is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when your spidey senses, like when you think about it, like it's really demonic. Like when you sit there and you think about the fact that somebody would stay at a restaurant where somebody's spitting on them and saying, "Hey, I don't want you there. I don't like you there," and they would just stay. That like you're just like, that's stupid. And then you start, and it goes down that hole of.
Well, that's why I question, how much of the movement was infiltrated by Marxists, by communists, and then how much of the movement were people who honestly believe this stuff. Because there is, I'm sure, a portion of people. I mean, goodness, my mom, she was like a rebel rouser, growing up here in the suburbs, and she talked about racism and things that she went through, and they were doing sit-ins and things like that. Now, she didn't know anything about Marxism or communism or anything like that. She just believed that there was something that was happening that was wrong, and she wanted to correct it.
The core of it is arrogant.
I understand what you're saying, KJ, because this is, I don't know if it's maybe it's a form of cognitive dissonance that we are experiencing. Not saying that the movement or the scheming was not there, but it's hard to tease out, like you're saying, like those who just believe that something had to be done versus the puppeteers,
right?
Right. I don't necessarily. I'm not saying. Again, I don't know. I don't even know. I don't know. I don't know that we need to know that degree to that degree. I don't know. Or maybe we are so far gone now that it doesn't even matter to what degree that mattered.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I agree. We're so far gone that like it. I mean, yeah, you're right, KJ. There were probably some innocent people that really just believed that they were doing the right thing. But at the core of it, I think it's Thomas Sowell's arrogance. Like, why do you feel like you can control the outcome of anybody else's behavior? But you only get to that conclusion when you wrap yourself in the word of God and you realize that ultimately, we are made in the image. Everybody's made in his image and his likeness, and people have free will and they do whatever they want. And and you're not in control of that.
Right.
Yeah, Thomas Sowell has a book. One of his books, one of them is called "The Vision of the Anointed." That basically, he talks about these elites who think that they are anointed to manipulate and run other people's lives. Now that's putting it, I'm grossly understating whatever. But and then he has another book about the anointed. I can't think of the title, but this was a lot. I love this talking to Chad. So I love the interview.
It was
one thing I like talking with him, it's not even a matter of a debate. I agree with you, it wasn't even a matter of that. It was just learning. He is a historian. He has this voice, or the way he tells a story, that makes you just want to listen. It's not even about disagreeing or debating. You just want to listen and pick up. I wrote some little notes down, some of the different ideas that he was talking about, and I want to research on my own, keep going. So yeah.
And there's another thing that I'm torn about.
Can you read his comment? Can you read his comment? Chad just responded.
Okay, let me see. Let me go.
Okay. There were a lot of people in the movement that genuinely believed, none of whom were in the leadership of the movement, but therein lies the problem. The impressionism of the beliefs was exploited. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then another thing, on the same lines, and I've talked to you guys about this, it's just like, so I'm engulfed, or we are engulfed in this culture, in this political, part of it. Crystal, we know Madam MAGA is Crystal.
I'm the ghetto MAGA girl.
And so I'm always asking myself, am I on the right path? Like, should I be leaning more towards biblical and side and witnessing and things like that, or should I continue on the political side? This is why I started the other page, the channel, because I felt like we are living in a time where people, Christ is not the center of many people's lives. And I wanted to kind of start talking more about that. But, I'm still pulled on the political end. Is doing this political stuff, is it worth it, anything? That's what I'm always wondering too.
I'm not going to say I have an answer for you.
Right. I
know how I answer maybe and or have grappled with that, maybe still grapple with it to some extent, is that like he said, his politics is downstream from his faith, right? So ultimately, we all have different skill sets, different arenas maybe we operate in, but you can, I guess, your light can shine wherever you are, I guess is what I want to say.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess what I would say to that is I think that it's beautiful that you are starting to explore that. Where I am at now is no one comes to the Father except the Holy Spirit draw them. And so at this point, I don't know if God is drawing these people, and I don't know if I'm the answer, so let your lights shine that men can see your good works and glorify the Father is where I'm at. And so I let them see what I'm doing, especially in politics. And I think God will draw them, but if God does not draw them, if they do what we say do based on biblical principles, they'll have a better life. I mean, think about it. Yeah, the Jews don't worship Jesus at all, but they follow the biblical principles and they have a great life. And so that's kind of where I am. Right. And so it's not necessarily a spiritual message for me.
No, I understand what you're saying.
It's like, hey, you can have a better life if you do this.
There are even polls that have surveys that show that atheists and agnostics in America have said that when Christians were more Christian, I'm just summarizing, when Christians were more Christian, America was still better, and they didn't believe in God. They don't believe in God. But they knew that America was better because people practice their Judeo-Christian values more.
Right. All right. Well, that does it for us tonight. Long night tonight, ladies. Thank you guys so much for watching and hanging in with us. We will be back on Wednesday night at 8 p.m., talking more about the culture, about politics. Until then, count your blessings and live a life of purpose. Good night.
Good night.